Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Word Wealth Bible Study on this Wednesday night. Hope you had a good day and you're ready to sit down with the Word and think about God's provision, God's grace, God's mercy, God's timing, God's plans, God's purposes. God. Tonight we're going to continue on in the book of Ruth because it's a fun book to read. It has so much truth and wealth in it. And besides that, it's just a good read. Tonight we're going to call this Risky Business out of Ruth chapter 3. A good man is hard to find, so the saying goes. And that's the backstory of Ruth chapter 3. It's all about the strangest marriage proposal in the Bible. If you're looking for ways to ask someone to marry you, the strategy that Ruth employed will likely be at the bottom of your list. Here's what we have. A woman asks a man to marry her, and he agrees. That's a bit unusual, but there's more to consider. A foreigner asks a Jew to marry her. That's extremely unlikely. And if we look a little closer, we realize that an employee asks her boss to marry her. That's really kind of strange. And finally, it's a younger woman who approaches an older man at midnight on a threshing floor to ask him to marry her. That's highly irregular, I'd say. And this story, it teaches us that God has his ways, and sometimes those ways seem very strange indeed. But we'll come back to that in a minute. If you're married, how'd you meet your spouse? Now, my wife, Mary, and I, we met when we were kids. She was 6 years old. I was 9 years old. That was a lot of years ago. And it was in Ridgecrest, California. Yes, that Ridgecrest, where my dad was the pastor of the Foursquare Church there, and her dad was the head council guy. Ran Sunday school, did everything. Loved my father-in-law. He was a great guy. And my mother-in-law, too, if she's watching. So, yep, that's the same Ridgecrest we're moving back to at the end of the month. So it's kind of like full circle. But I remember, and actually, Mary and I were not an item when we were 6 and 9, by the way, just so you know. But when she was like a senior in high school and I was in college, I don't know, something began to happen. Something began to percolate. And then I noticed this cute little girl. I'd see her from time to time at our church because her grandparents went to our church. And she'd come and visit them, and I'd see this cute little girl. And then we started writing letters. Actually, she did most of the writing. There was a few phone calls perhaps along the way. And then we met serendipitously, or it could be the Lord's hands, I'm not sure, at Old Oak Ranch. And at Old Oak Ranch, something sparked, something clicked, something in my spirit said, she's the one. Now, if you ask her, that was the farthest thing from her mind. But I'm telling you, I hear the Lord. But I didn't tell her that. We just waited. We courted at Life Bible College, now Life Pacific University, and spent a lot of hours talking out in front of the girls' dorm. I fell deeply in love, and I think she did too. Eventually, we were engaged and got married in 1978. So this year, we will celebrate 43 years together, and they've been wonderful, mostly. You'd have to get her opinion on that. Now, I'd like to say that I believe in the sovereign, predestined, eternal plan of God. And I've experienced it, I think. Now, people laugh, but I believe it's true. God knows every part of our lives. And when we contemplate the future, we like to say anything can happen. And that's true because anything happens all the time. And you can't predict anything like that in advance. It goes for random meetings, scheduling wise at Old Oak Ranch, and it goes for midnight meetings on the threshing floor. But when God is in control, God is in control. Now, before we jump into Ruth 3, let me add that the way couples meet is infinitely varied. These days, it often happens online through some dating app like Match.com or eHarmony.com or Farmers.com or, it's one of those .coms. And you meet people who have met their wife that way, met their husband that way. They get married, fall in love, get married, and have kids together now. It just happens, including my son. Sometimes people are introduced by a mutual friend, or they meet through work or at church or a party or whatever. Occasionally, people don't want to say how they met because it embarrasses them. Perhaps it happened because of sinful choices. Sometimes the way couples meet each other seems so strange that it's almost unbelievable. But that leads us back to the story of Ruth and Boaz. Nothing about their meeting or their marriage seems normal. Can we just say that right up front? At least by modern standards. Ruth didn't have many good options. Today she might write an ad like this for her eHarmony, right? Widowed woman from Moab seeks godly Israelite man of character for long walks in the barley fields and quiet evenings by the fire. Must like children. That wasn't even an option 3,000 years ago, was it? A good man is hard to find. That's true. But a good woman is also hard to find. Ruth chapter 3 tells us how a good man and a good woman found each other and ended up getting married. And it's proof positive that God works in, with, and through our choices to accomplish His will. This story seems so unlikely that it has to be true. File it under truth is stranger than fiction. And this chapter divides into 3 scenes, kind of like a good movie or Hallmark story. Yeah? There's the risky plan, a midnight proposal, and providential pause. And the whole episode happens in one night, overnight. It begins one evening, the main event happens around midnight, and then the final scene takes place early in the next morning. So let's go through it. Harvest time had come. First 6 verses talks about harvest. And that's the key to everything else that happens in this story. After many years of famine, there was a good harvest at last. That's why Naomi knew Boaz would be at the threshing floor. When you read threshing floor, don't think of a barn, but imagine a flat spot near the top of a hill where the winds could separate the barley from the chaff. And it was the happiest time of the year for farmers because it meant that all of their hard work was about to pay off. Months earlier, they had planted barley and then waited for the rains to come. And as owner of the land, Boaz would be at the threshing floor to make sure that everything worked out, to oversee his workers. He would spend the night there to protect the crop from thieves. And that's why Naomi knew exactly where to find Boaz on this particular night. That brings us to her plan, which she hatched, so to speak, to provide rest for Ruth, her Moabite daughter-in-law. That's verse 1. She and Ruth had already experienced kindness from Boaz. We looked at that just last week. And now it was time to take the next step. Now her plan was risky, to say the least. Here's what verses 3 through 5 says. Wash. That's always a good thing. Put on perfumed oil and wear your best clothes. Go down to the threshing floor, but don't let the man know that you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, notice the place where he's lying. Go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and then he will explain to you what you should do. Now, why would she suggest such a preposterous scheme? Well, we find the key in verse 2. Isn't Boaz our relative? Naomi's already taken Ruth in and made her part of the family, even though she is from Moab. That's an astonishing statement all by itself. But then she calls Boaz a relative. And in some way or another, he's related to Elimelech, Naomi's late husband. A cousin, an uncle, more distant relative, we don't know. But he shared the same family tree as Elimelech, which means he was qualified to become a kinsman redeemer. Now, to fill that role, he must be a relative able to take on the responsibility. And above all, he must be willing to do it. He couldn't be forced. The kinsman redeemer stepped in during a time of great need, which the death of Elimelech would qualify for that, to preserve the family property and to maintain the family bloodline. Now, Naomi knew all this, and she knows Boaz could rescue Ruth and provide a home and a future for her. And he and Ruth could also have kids, which would preserve the name of her late husband, Elimelech. All of this, there was no doubt in her mind that this is true. Now, some Bible commentators take a dim view of Naomi's plan because they think it was borderline immoral. Some even think she wanted Ruth to convince Boaz to sleep with her. Now, I've already said the plan is risky, but don't superimpose current morals on what was taking place at that time. It was dangerous for a young woman, a foreigner, to go to the threshing floor at night dressed in the way she was dressed, in her best. You can think of a dozen ways this could go wrong, that's for sure. But this story is in the Bible because it's true, not because we need to do what Ruth did. Beyond the risk factor, I see no evidence that Naomi had bad motives and certainly would have not encouraged Ruth to do something immoral. We already said, and Boaz said, everybody knew she had great character. To be immoral would have been outside of Ruth's character. Okay? Remember, Ruth and Boaz already met in the harvest field. She had already made a positive impression on him. He knew about her loyal love for Naomi and how Ruth had left Moab to live with her. He knew how hard she worked in the field. Her reputation was solid. Impact. It preceded her. He'd already welcomed her. He had warned his men not to bother her. See if she was in him. You follow me? So, thinking though, perhaps some thoughts of romance had entered Boaz's mind. It could be. Certainly he appreciated how difficult it was for a woman from her background to come to Bethlehem. But think about it for a moment. Boaz couldn't approach Ruth. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't. Why? She was young, he was old. She was a widow. She was from Moab. That's strike 3, by the way. And now, here's strike 4, if you get 4. She was now working for him. In that culture at that time, it just couldn't happen. And understanding that, Naomi hatches her audacious scheme. Now, was she a matchmaker? If so, who could blame her for wanting to see Ruth and Boaz get married? Boaz is a good man, Ruth's a good woman. Not much has already been established. If Boaz can't propose to Ruth, then she can propose to him. And the details about her dress and the perfume just kind of set the scene. They would show Boaz how serious she was about what she was about to do and say. Far from being some sort of midnight seduction, there was a way, perhaps the only way, for this man and this woman to come together as husband and wife. Now, note how specific Naomi is. She knew Boaz would sleep with his head facing inward, like towards the middle, and his feet facing outward. Like they slept around the threshing floor. And so Ruth had to find a way to arrive at the threshing floor undetected, figure out where he was sleeping, and wait until he had finished eating and drinking And finally, she was to uncover his feet, because that would guarantee on the cold Israeli night that eventually he would wake up because his feet were cold. Yeah, it works for me. Perhaps the most surprising part is Ruth's response in verse 5. Because Naomi lays out this whole plot, and this is what Ruth says: I will do everything you say. She knew the risks involved. There are a lot of reasons to say no, but she said yes. And so God's plan begins to unfold for his children when they say yes. It's true for us too. When Walt Kaiser, who was a great preacher, preached on this chapter, he called it veiled providence. That's a great phrase. It perfectly balances both sides of the story. On one hand, it looks as if Ruth is taking a big risk on her own, but behind Naomi's plan stood God, who orchestrated every detail, including Boaz's cold feet that woke him up in the middle of the night. Now, faith means taking a risk for God and leaving the results in his hands. That's a good phrase. Let me say that again. Faith means taking a risk for God and leaving the results in his hands. When the sun went down and Ruth left for the threshing floor, Naomi was pacing nervously, not knowing what would happen next. I think she was praying, walking and praying, walking and praying, walking and praying. Oh God, let this work. Oh God, be with Ruth. Oh God, let Boaz be in a good mood. Crying out to the Lord. That's how faith works, though. We take a step forward, following the light that we have, trusting God to bring us out in the right place. And sometimes things don't work out as we planned, but that's okay too. Our part is to take the first step. God can take care of the rest. There's been plenty of times in my life, and probably yours, when you think, man, that was a mistake, only to look back and see, no, it just felt like a mistake at the time, but it's exactly what God wanted us to do to get us to where we're at. So scene 1 ends with Ruth stepping into the evening darkness, wondering how Boaz will respond, and her future hangs in the balance. Dun, dun, dun! Scene 2. It's the midnight proposal. Starts in verse 7, goes through verse 15. Midnight comes, and all is quiet at the threshing floor. Suddenly, a man stirs, realizing his feet are freezing. They're uncovered. And looking into the darkness, Boaz makes out the form of a woman lying at his feet. Now, I would say that was a little startling and disconcerting, a little troubling. Who was this? Was she a prostitute? After all, it was known that a man could buy sexual favors at the threshing floor. So Boaz asks, in a whisper, I presume, "Who are you? Who are you?" No doubt her answer shocked him. "I am Ruth, your servant. Take me under your wing, for you are a family redeemer." Now, I know in 21st century Western culture, or any culture, that just sounds weird, different, right? But Boaz knew exactly what it meant. It was a straight out, straightforward marriage proposal. The phrase, "take me under your wing," can also be translated as "spread your covering over me." And in some translations, you can read it that way. It was Ruth's way of saying, "Marry me and bring me under your protection." And she uses the same word, Hebrew word, that Boaz used in Ruth chapter 2, verse 12, when he described the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. He knew exactly what she meant. As I have come to God for my spiritual refuge, now I'm coming to you for my personal refuge. Now, if Boaz had been a lesser man, he might have tried to take advantage of her. He could have said, okay, let's sleep together. I'll think about it in the morning. But he didn't do that. He responds in 3 ways that show the greatness of his character. First, he prays that God will bless her, because this kindness to him is greater than her earlier kindness to Naomi. Look at verse 10. That's what it says. She could have married a younger man for passion, for money, but she didn't. Second, he agrees to do what she asked because everyone knows she's a woman of noble character. That's verse 11. It's the same word used in Proverbs 31:10 of the noble or virtuous or excellent woman, a Proverbs 31 woman. Though Ruth doesn't know it yet, Boaz has agreed to do more than she asked. She wanted him to marry her, but he's promised to guarantee her future with him or without him. Wow. Now here we hit on a sudden detour in the story. Boaz is willing to marry her, but there's another man who's a closer relative, and he must have the first choice in this matter. So here's verse 13. Stay here tonight, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem you, that's good. Let him redeem you. But if he doesn't want to redeem you, as the Lord lives, I will. Now lie down until morning. Again, purely innocent. He's protecting her. He's protecting her. Boaz cares so much for Ruth and Naomi that he's willing for the other man to redeem Ruth, even if it meant Boaz could never marry her. He only wants her needs to be met. And then now thirdly, he protects her reputation and provides a pledge to Naomi. Verses 14 and 15. She's to leave in the pre-dawn darkness so that no rumors get started. And the gift of grain is like a dowry payment to Naomi. 6 measures of barley might weigh like 60 to 90 pounds. Boaz's extravagant gesture to Naomi was intended to show his commitment to both women. A lesser minded man might say, okay, I'll marry Ruth and not worry about Naomi. She can just go her own way. But Boaz was not a lesser man. He wanted to take care of both. So the second scene ends as the sun begins to rise over the mountains to the east, which leads us to the third and final scene. It's the providential pause, verses 16 through 18. Now, if we were writing this story, we would go straight to the wedding. You know, that's Hallmark. But that's not how life works. Every relationship has its ups and downs, its sudden twists and turns. And no doubt Ruth went home elated and deflated. She had every reason to smile because Boaz had not only welcomed her, he had promised to marry her if he could. If he could. Those 3 little words just kind of hung in the air. See, there was another man, a mystery man, who was a closer relative who had the first right of refusal. And Boaz couldn't be the kinsman redeemer until the first man turned it down. Now, how would that happen? What if the other man decided to marry her? Would she have to do the whole threshing floor at midnight routine again? So many questions. And besides that, it's not her culture. She's like way out of her comfort zone. So many questions flooded her mind. And that's when Naomi offered some very sensible advice. Verse 18. Naomi said, "My daughter, wait until you find out how things go, for he won't rest until he resolves this today." Now, the word translated wait can mean to sit down, and we would say today, sit tight. Sometimes the godliest thing you can do, folks, is to just wait. Sit down and wait. Wait for God to do what God's going to do. Waiting time is not wasted time if you're waiting on the Lord. Delay is not denial if it's under development. Have you heard me say that before? Just checking. So as the chapter draws to a close, it seems like the story has hit a snag. But it's a providential pause that sets up the final act, and it gives us time to think about each person in the story. Naomi's heart from bitter has now been warmed by the Lord. The woman who came home bitter and empty now sees God at work behind the scenes. When she returned to Bethlehem, she was hungry and penniless, and that's about to change for good. Ruth has taken the daring step of proposing marriage to Boaz, and she does it in a way that gives Boaz the option to say no, but he's not about to refuse her. Clearly, the Lord has stirred up love between these two unlikely people. Boaz has acted with the highest character when another man might have taken advantage of the situation. And no matter what happens next, Ruth will have a husband, and Naomi will never want again. So what about this snag? Well, as Shakespeare once said, the course of true love never did run smooth. Faith waits for what it wants. How different that is from the way of most of us and how we live. Waiting is one of the hardest parts of the Christian life. Thousands act who cannot wait. Yet we all spend a big chunk of our lives waiting for things to happen. For every green light, it seems like there are 5 yellow ones and a dozen red ones. We all must wait whether we like it or not. And in this case, Ruth must wait for Boaz to take care of the matter. Perhaps it'll be resolved favorably, but maybe not. When it cannot do anything else, faith waits on the Lord. How hard that is for most of us. But waiting has its uses. It slows us down. It gives us time to think and to pray. And it teaches us that God is in charge and not us. Was it daring for Ruth to approach Boaz at midnight? Without a doubt. Could she have been seen by others? Definitely. Was it risky to put on an attractive dress and wear perfume? No question about it. So many things could have gone wrong. But I began tonight by saying that a good man is hard to find, and a good woman is hard to find too. And in Ruth 3, a good woman finds her good man, and it happens through a risky plan that leads to a midnight proposal that ends with a providential pause. And the fingerprints of God are all over this story. Ruth chapter 3 shows us how God works through our choices to accomplish His will for our lives. He uses Naomi's plan, Ruth's daring, courage, and Boaz's integrity to bring them to the brink of marriage. And though they don't know it yet, that union will produce a child who will be the ancestor of Jesus Christ, the Savior of the whole world. Now, this story is going to have a happy ending. I'm glad to say, but we're not quite there yet. So you're going to have to stay tuned and come back next week for the next installment of the Book of Ruth. And you won't believe how Ruth solves this snag and clears up a way for a happy wedding day. You're going to love it. I think that's about it for tonight. Is that good? I love this story. Go back and reread it. You're going to enjoy it again. Lord, thanks so much for the illustration of how you work. We just walk in obedience, we walk in integrity, we walk in love towards people. And Lord, you move us and you move people and you move situations. Even we see your fingerprints all over, the fingerprints of your grace. Lord, I pray for our lives, those of us who are trusting you for things. Lord, some of us are in the waiting mode. We're waiting to see what's coming next. Lord, I pray that you would just give us peace, Lord, in our hearts and our minds. Give us courage to take the action that you call us to. Lord, and then we thank you that we can leave the results of all of that in your hands. For you're a good God, and you have good things for your people. Lord, bless your people tonight. And Lord, may we be a blessing to others. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, thanks for joining tonight. We'll see you in the morning for Bible study. Devotions. We'll see you next week for Bible study to go to the next continuing story of the Book of Ruth. All right, love y'all. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.